You cannot change anyone. And the longer you spend trying, the more of yourself you quietly give away in the process. Think about someone in your life right now, a friend stuck in the same cycle for the third, fourth, fifth time, a parent who refuses to see how their behavior has shaped the people around them, a partner who knows exactly what they need to do differently, but doesn't. You've had the conversations. You've offered the perspective, the gentleness, the tough love. You've stayed up late, turning it over in your mind, searching for the right words that might finally land, finally reach them, finally make them see what you can see so clearly from where you stand. And still nothing shifts. Or something shifts for a week, maybe two, and then slowly, silently, everything drifts back to where it was. That feeling you're left with, that hollow, heavy exhaustion, has a name. And Carl Jung understood it more deeply than almost anyone. What Jung identified, and what most of us are never told, is this: the compulsion to fix other people is rarely just about those people. It has roots that go much deeper than concern, much deeper than love, into the parts of ourselves we cannot yet bring ourselves to look at directly. There's a particular kind of person who becomes a fixer. You probably recognize the type because if you're watching this, there's a reasonable chance you are this type. They're often highly empathetic, often intelligent, often the most responsible person in any given room. They notice things others miss, the slight tension in someone's jaw, the way a certain subject makes a friend deflect, the pattern underneath a pattern. This sensitivity is a real gift. But gifts, when they're turned in the wrong direction, become something else. And this gift, this capacity for seeing into people, becomes a problem. When it's used as a way of avoiding the most important person you'll ever have to look at clearly yourself. Jung spent decades mapping the structure of the human psyche. And one of the concepts that sits at the center of his entire body of work is what he called the shadow. The shadow is not your darkness in a dramatic sense. It's not the worst of what you're capable of. It's simpler and stranger than that. The shadow is everything you have pushed out of conscious awareness, every trait, every emotion, every impulse you decided at some point in your life was not acceptable to show. The parts of you that got too messy, too vulnerable, too angry, too needy, too much. So you packaged them up and filed them somewhere you didn't have to look at them daily. And here's what Jung found, again and again. Across decades of working with patients, those hidden parts don't disappear. They project. Projection is not a metaphor. It's an actual psychological mechanism. When we can't tolerate something in ourselves, we perceive it in others. We see it out there in them with striking clarity and emotional intensity, and we respond to it in them as if the problem were entirely theirs. The person who obsessively criticizes a friend's emotional volatility is usually someone sitting on a mountain of unfelt emotion they've labeled as weakness. The one who can't stop trying to rescue a partner from self-destructive habits is often someone whose own self-destructive habits are hidden under a layer of productivity, control, and helpfulness. The individual who fixates on a family member's irresponsibility has often buried a terrifying fear of their own potential for chaos. None of this makes you a bad person. Jung was not in the business of condemning people for how their minds work. He was in the business of illuminating it, because you cannot work with something you cannot see. But here's where it gets important, and where most conversations about projection stop too soon. Projection doesn't just mean you're seeing your own stuff in other people. It means you're unconsciously trying to resolve your own internal conflicts by resolving theirs. When you fix them, something in you experiences temporary relief. The anxiety quiets. You feel useful, grounded, purposeful. The problem is that the source of the anxiety was never actually in them, so the relief is always temporary. It's always incomplete, always requiring another round of fixing to maintain. It's a loop, and loops like this don't break on their own. Let's be honest about what this loop is costing you, because the costs are rarely spoken out loud. The most obvious cost is energy. Not just the time spent in those conversations, the hours replaying them afterward. The mental real estate occupied by someone else's problem as you try to fall asleep, but the deep, cellular kind of depletion that comes from directing your life force outward, towards someone else's transformation rather than inward, toward your own. Energy is not infinite. Every unit of it you spend trying to change someone who isn't asking to be changed is a unit not going toward your own creative work, your own growth, your own healing. This isn't selfishness. It's thermodynamics. The math doesn't lie. The second cost is more insidious. Resentment. Not the loud, dramatic kind, the quiet kind that accumulates slowly over months and years. When you invest heavily in someone's change and they don't change, something in you registers a kind of betrayal, even when they never asked for the investment. The logic of the unconscious mind doesn't distinguish between gifts freely given and debts it expected to be repaid. It just keeps score. And when the score remains unpaid, resentment builds, not because you're ungenerous, because the exchange was never real. You were trying to fix yourself through them. And when that project failed, something in you grieved as if it were their fault. But the third cost, this is the one Jung would point to with the most urgency, is the cost to your individuation. Individuation is one of the most important words in all of Jungian psychology, and one of the least understood outside of it. It doesn't mean becoming an individual in the social sense, standing apart from the crowd, asserting your uniqueness. It means something far more profound and far more demanding, becoming whole. It's the lifelong process of integrating all the parts of yourself you've disowned, the shadow, the unlived life, the grief you've postponed, the anger you've domesticated into helpfulness, the need you've disguised as capability. It means becoming slowly and painfully and also beautifully, a more complete version of who you actually are, rather than the edited version you decided was safe to show the world. This is the work. And it is hard, unglamorous, disorienting work, which is partly why so many people avoid it by staying busy with the much more tangible-seeming project of fixing the people around them. When you're focused on someone else's transformation, you feel like you're doing something. There's momentum. There's purpose. There's the satisfying clarity of being able to see what another person needs to do and why they need to do it. The problem of your own interior life, its contradictions, its wounds, its unresolved complexes, is kept safely in the background, where it won't have to be looked at directly. Fixing others in this sense is not just projection, it's avoidance wearing the costume of love. Jung wrote that the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely, not others, yourself. And when you sit with that sentence long enough, something in it unlocks. Because the reason it's terrifying to accept yourself completely is that you already know, on some level, what's down there waiting to be accepted. The anger you've called sensitivity, the fear you've called wisdom, the grief you've called being fine, the need you've called independence. Accepting these things, really accepting them, not intellectually acknowledging them, but feeling them, making room for them, letting them exist without immediately trying to fix them. That requires a kind of courage that most of us would rather defer indefinitely. And so instead, we find someone whose version of the problem is slightly more visible, slightly more accessible, slightly easier to diagnose than our own. And we pour ourselves into trying to change them, because at least there, we feel like we have something to work with. At least there we can see what's wrong. Here's the paradox Jung kept returning to across his writing, his lectures. His private letters, the people most relentlessly committed to changing others, are almost always the people most deeply resistant to changing themselves. Not because they're bad people, but because the resistance and the compulsion are two expressions of the same underlying dynamic. They're both ways of managing the same unbearable anxiety, anxiety of the unexamined self. And the path out of that anxiety is not through other people. It was never through other people. Think about what it actually means to love someone you cannot fix. Not the romanticized version, not the montage of patience and gentle wisdom, but the real version. The version where you sit across from someone you care about, watching them make a choice you know will hurt them, and you say nothing. Not because you don't care, not because you've given up, but because you finally understood that your silence patience, your restraint, your willingness to let them be wrong is itself a form of profound respect. It says, "I believe you are capable of finding your own way. I trust that your pain has something to teach you that my intervention would only interrupt." That kind of love requires you to have done enough of your own work that you're no longer outsourcing your sense of peace onto other people's outcomes. There is a difference between witnessing someone and trying to rescue them. Witnessing means you see them, really see them, without agenda, without the need for them to become different in order for you to be okay. You can hold space for someone's pain without assuming it's your job to relieve it. You can love someone and let them walk their own path at their own pace, making their own mistakes, arriving at their own understanding in their own time. This is not detachment. This is not indifference wearing the costume of wisdom. This is something much harder than either fixing or abandoning. It's genuine presence without control. When you do your own work, when you seriously begin the process of individuation, when you stop outsourcing your psychological relief to other people's transformations and start turning honestly toward your own, something unexpected happens. You stop needing them to change. Not because you've given up on caring, not because you've become cold, but because your sense of inner stability is no longer being held up by their behavior. The anxiety that used to demand resolution through fixing them has found a more honest outlet. You've started giving it what it was always actually asking for, your own attention. And here's the thing that nobody says, because it sounds too simple, maybe even a little passive. When you genuinely do this work, when you become more integrated, more honest, more present to your own interior life, you become more capable of actually helping the people you love. Not by fixing them, by being the kind of person who doesn't need them to be fixed. There's a quality of presence that comes from having faced yourself honestly that cannot be manufactured and cannot be faked. People feel it. They feel the difference between someone who loves them contingent on their changing. They're improving. They're becoming what the other person needs them to be, and someone who loves them simply as they are, without that quiet, constant pressure underneath every conversation. The second kind of love is rarer, and it can only come from someone who has stopped running from themselves. So the invitation here, and it is an invitation, not a demand, not a judgment, is to redirect. Not to stop caring about the people in your life, but to care about yourself with the same urgency, the same patience, the same belief that change is possible, that you've been extending outward to everyone but yourself. Ask yourself the questions Jung would ask, not the ones about other people. Those come easily, the harder ones. Why does this person's behavior disturb you as deeply as it does? What does your need to fix them protect you from having to feel? What is it exactly that you are not yet willing to look at in yourself? These questions don't have quick answers. They have slow ones, the kind that emerge over months of honest attention. In therapy, in reflection, in the quiet moments when you stop distracting yourself with other people's problems, long enough to hear what your own interior life has been trying to tell, you dot the transformation you've been trying to create in the people around you. It was always yours to make. It was always pointing inward. Every conversation you've had where you tried to make someone see what you could see, every night you spent agonizing over someone else's choices, some part of you already knew this. Some part of you has known for a long time that the person who most needed your attention, your compassion, your relentless belief in the possibility of change, was the one looking back at you from the mirror. That's not a comfortable realization, but it's the one that leads somewhere real, not just the temporary relief of feeling like you're doing something, but actual movement toward becoming someone whose presence heals rather than pressures, someone whose love doesn't come with an invisible invoice attached. If this video found you at a time when you needed it, I want to know. Comment below with the relationship, a friend, a parent, a partner, whoever it is you've been trying to fix the longest. You don't have to say anything more than that. And if you want to keep going deeper into this, into the shadow, into what individuation actually looks like in practice, the next video is right here. Because understanding why you try to fix people is one thing. Actually stopping, sitting with the discomfort of that redirected energy, letting it find its way back to where it belongs, is where the real work begins. and it is the most worthwhile work you will ever do. Not because it makes you better than anyone else, but because it makes you more fully, more honestly, more completely yourself. And that is the only foundation from which anything real can grow.